It's recording.
Okay, hi folks. Topic for tonight is stopping the spread, and we start and continue on from the history of managing milfoil. I'm Mike Schaffer, Jane Oppenlander in front, Kurt TeKolste in back. Will also be presenting, and we'll entertain questions at any time throughout or at the end if you have any questions. If I can figure this out. Did I do that right?
You did.
Good. Part of our message is milfoil can't be eradicated, but we can manage it. We can control it. We have a long history going back to the 1980s, really, when we started to formulate some ways in which we could get together as a group, and we ended up with a small group, and we just called ourselves the Milfoil Task Force, and actually the town incorporated that. Jim, you were going to look for somewhere back in the archives when it actually passed as a resolution, somewhere maybe in the late 80s, early 90s. The goal is a healthy lake, which we think our lake is healthy now, but we want to maintain it. But we all have a part to play. So we'll give you some basics about milfoil. We'll talk a little bit about the history of our management, our future with milfoil, what we can and are doing now. We have some of the equipment that we use. We'll explain at the end for our CSLAP program, our Citizen Scientist program, and any questions or discussion. Okay. What is milfoil?
Oh, you're going to keep talking?
You're talking.
Oh, okay. Why is it a problem? So why is milfoil a problem? Most of you already know the answer. But it grows quickly and forms dense mats, canopies that block the light, and that has a lot of effects after it blocks the light. It outcompetes and prevents light from getting to other native aquatic plants. It reduces the microinvertebrates, which are the things at the bottom of the food chain that the fish feed on, and so that escalates, and it reduces that population, which in turn reduces the fish population. It affects the water quality. That extra weed in there, that extra organic matter can increase the phosphorus load, and reduces the oxygen content, and it can alter the water temperatures, and all this can have an effect on all of the creatures and that occupy the lake. For us, what it does for us is it really renders the lake unusable for recreation. We'll do a little tour. Here's what it looks like. This. Take a minute for this to come up. So this is a scuba tour that shows you a little bit of what it looks like down in one of those mats, one of the canopies of the milfoil growing. So you can see how congested it is. So that's the problem with milfoil. So what is it? It's an invasive submerged aquatic plant, and it's perennial, so it comes back every year. It's rooted at lake bottoms, and it's native to Europe, Asia, and North Africa. And it first appeared in this country, in New York, in 1880. And now it's found almost everywhere, 45 states and 3 provinces. So now is the audience participation part. So we have some quizzes for you. So where does milfoil grow? A is 1 to 5 feet. B is 3 to 13 feet. C is greater than 10 feet, and D is any depth. Okay, who says A? B? C? It's B. It's 3 to 15. It's 3 to 13 feet. And so if you look at Lake Luzerne, here's a map of that, and you can see where it's going to grow. Right? Here's the 10-foot isobar. So you can see that all these regions is where it's going to appear, and then here's some but you can see most of this part of the South Cove falls into that 10-foot area. But you won't find it growing either, it's not deep enough. So that's, so next question. How does milfoil propagate? By seeds? By stolons, which are horizontal roots? Vegetative fragmentation, where it breaks off, drifts, and then reroots itself? All of the above. So who says A? Seeds. B, stolons, horizontal roots. C, vegetative fragmentation. D, all of the above. It's all of the above. So it has a lot of ways that it can propagate itself. And so here's some examples of what those seeds look like, and here it is coming, you see it coming to the surface and it's formed that canopy. How fast does milfoil grow? 6 inches a day? 2 inches a day? 2 inches a week? 2 inches a month? 6 inches a season. So votes for A. B, 2 inches a day. C, 2 inches a week. D, 2 inches per month. E, 6 inches per season. It's 2 inches a day. So it grows really fast. And that's part of the concern with managing it. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Mike, who's going to tell us about the history of the milfoil management in Lake Luzerne. Oh, by the way, you all passed. You did a great job.
I don't have any prizes, but
We should have
brought prizes. Next time. Milfoil is a weed, and people say, well, where did it come from? Why does it appear in some lakes and it doesn't appear in other lakes? And a lot of questions about milfoil. Milfoil, the plant itself, originally, I went to a conference, I don't know how many years back, was an aquatic plant. Oh, I'm not in focus here. Down. Milfoil was an aquatic plant that was in aquariums in people's homes. You could buy them at pet stores or where they sold fish. And people would have them in their aquariums. And when they were done with their fish and aquariums, they might just dump them out, and sometimes it found its way into a lake. And that's how it got here from Asia and these other countries in Europe and Asia. And it just grows like crazy. Some lakes actually have shut down parts of their lake with the milfoil in it. Saratoga is probably the best local example, where they ended up buying these like thresher machines, almost like lawnmowers, big, huge machines. And all that did was chop them up and it would regrow. And they were out there cutting it, every 2 weeks or so. And it didn't work until they finally got authorization and used chemicals. However, they are not in the park. So they were very successful with eradicating their milfoil. Lakeshore residents can first remove milfoil at the shorelines. So we found out that you could do 50 feet or so in front of your area if you lived on the shore of a lake. Individual efforts didn't control the spread. All it did was clear a path in your immediate area. Group of concerned citizens, we called ourselves the initial milfoil group. Later on, we turned into the milfoil pirates. We had designed actually a pirate, pardon? There it is up there. We actually had a sticker, we had shirts and different things, and that was to get people motivated. And at one time we had about 25 volunteers when we were out in the lake. When we were doing hand harvesting, we had two divers who we actually were volunteer divers at first, and then we contracted a professional diver from Screw Lake. His name was Steve Lemire. He's unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. And he was our first paid consultant to the lake, and he would, but just him alone, he would go around and do some of the heavy beds and collect the milfoil and dispose of it. Disposing of it was a little bit of an issue with the town and the town board, and it was decided that the milfoil would go up to the landfill and actually had to be enclosed so that birds didn't come in and feed and drop seeds again somewhere else. And so there were a whole host of things that we learned about milfoil. We attended conferences, we did research, we visited other lakes, we were down in Saratoga several times to see what they were doing. We commissioned lake studies going back probably to the, Kurt, did you get the earlier one? Was it 81 was the first one? The first milfoil study in the book, or 85? 89. Anyway, we're going back 30 plus years in this. We looked for long-term strategy, in which we needed a lake management individual to help us through. And we focused on the outreach funding, community efforts and volunteer efforts from the community. And we're very successful in all those areas. Busy years, 2006, 2010, we did benthic matting. We started with harvesting, and in order to satisfy a permit, eventually to get to the use of chemical, which was sonar at the time, which was 2010, we needed to do what was called matting. And that was very labor intensive. You see a slide here, I think, coming up about, we had this big floating raft, and there were 15 or 20 of us. We would put together these mats that were donated by IP from Glens Falls. And we had to sew rebar into it so they would sink. And unfortunately, look at this part here, the mats killed everything underneath. Good plants, bad plants, any kind of aquatic life that was down there. The mats were hard to move. We had to do that after 30 days. And we didn't have enough of them. We initially started with about 50, we got another 50, and it was took us almost a week or more just to move them. And the grass growth was growing faster than we could contain it. And that's a little bit of matting procedure. We had kayaks out around us to help control. We had people in the water. Generally, they were snorkeling. We might have one or two scuba divers. That was me in the middle waving. I'm not waving, I'm saying, help, come get me. And that was our floating raft. We looked for herbicide treatment. How could we do that? What did we need to do? So we spent a year, maybe a little bit more, researching a fellow by the name of Bob Sherman, who lived on the lake, tremendous amount of time. He and several other volunteers prepared permit applications where we had to go to the state, we had to go to the DEC, we had to go to the APA, and we had to go locally to the town to make sure that everything was covered, all our bases were covered, in order to become the first permitted use of chemical control in the park. And everything fell into place, and we did it. However, this line here down here, we had to put across a barrier. containment barrier because we could only do the cove down here, which was very, very heavily infiltrated with milfoil. It was like matted down there. It would come up to the surface and just flow over the top, and it was very, very heavy. The reason we could only do that area was because we outflow in Luzerne into the Hudson River. And the APA and the DEC and the state and whoever the president of the United States was at the time said, no, you can't do that. We can't flow into the Hudson. Now with the newer chemical herbicides that are out there, there's a possibility that we won't need to worry about it. There was no impact on wildlife. We held a couple of different sessions at town hall. There were people that were objecting to it on the basis of what they considered would be negative effects on the lake. We absolutely saw no negative effects. Our water quality sampling, which was performed weekly, professionally, both the professionals and by the volunteers on both sides of the curve, both where we had the chemical and on the other side, showed no effects. It dissipated very quickly, and the milfoil was, I would say, not completely eradicated, but it was like 95% eradicated. We could now find it. There's the curtain that we had to put up at the time. And there's one of the divers in the water there, checking to make sure. We had to make sure that it went all the way to the bottom. We had to make sure it was weighted. We had to make sure we had blocks down. I can't remember how many cinder blocks we put down, but it was enough to build a small house. We had to keep it, make sure that the water was going to be contained on the cove only.
And talk about the fish, you watched the fish swim up.
Oh, yeah. The fish would swim up and kind of like scratch their fin. I can't go any further right now. The fishing down there was excellent. People would actually go over that containment to go fish at the other side. So a lot of the fishermen like weeds. The good weeds weren't affected. I say the good weeds. The non-invasive weeds were not affected. And that's part of the research that was done both before, during, and after this. So at our peak, we were funded by the town for that. Suction harvesting returned and still remains today. At its peak, we had between 18 and 22 tons of milfoil taken out of the lake, which is a huge amount. Ongoing efforts include our annual support, our volunteers, which we'll get into in a minute, which is what we do, our lake study surveys. Well, we try to inform the community, make sure that they know what we're doing, when, why. We keep up with the latest scientific developments. Yes, ma'am.
So the chemical didn't work, or it worked and then they
It did work.
back?
No, it did work.
It did work.
We did it once. We did it once.
What?
And we have not done it since.
Why?
Why have we not done it since?
Right.
Cost was one thing. I absolutely don't remember. I could get that information for you from our archives, but I don't remember at the time. Plus, you need a permit.
And the permit was good
The
for.
permit was good for one time only. You get one shot, one time, and you use it, and you're done, and then you have to reapply and go through all the steps all over again.
So
Which,
why didn't you go through the steps?
one of the reasons was that for 6 or 7 years, there was no growth in that cove. So we didn't need a permit. We just did the hand harvesting for the little spots that we could. And then at that time later on, some of the people had moved away from the committee, our original committee.
And the permit issue again, was it the APA? Who issued the permit?
APA signed off on it. It probably came through DEC and the APA had, that was the last one I remember that we had to go through to get their blessing on that. And they monitored us fairly closely. I mean,
And the town of Luzerne participated in seeking this permit?
yes, they did. Yes, they were with us the whole way, all steps of the way. We actually had a couple of, I don't have slides here to show, but the previous town boards, a couple of town boards ago, I would take them out, and at the time I had a small motorboat, and I took them out to show them how dense the weed areas were. One of the town board members owned one of the motels on the lake, and he was always adamant that we do something about it, especially the hand harvesting, and especially in front of his place, which did occur. We would make sure that the divers would go down and clear out paths, because people complained about the kayaking, the paddling, the swimming. So if recreationally, the lake will suffer with an overabundance of the invasive weeds. Part where we keep up on latest scientific and so research, we've gone to conferences. We just attended one last Friday. It was Jane and Kurt and I. We're at a Lake Association conference, and we're also members of lake associations, so we kind of keep in touch with different associations. And we also have a lake manager that is involved with lake associations. So this is our suction harvesting, our current boats that go out. We have, Jim, help me out with the company. It's
AE Commercial Diving of Minnesota,
Vermont. Thank you. They have 3 boats actually, 2 that suction and 1 that takes the milfoil, brings it in, and takes it off, takes it away.
Where does it go?
I don't know if it's still going to the dump or they take it with them.
yeah, it's going up to the dump to put on all night. So
Okay.
they will be back, by the way, a couple of weeks to do the second dump. So.
Okay. It's not. I did. Don't laugh. You know I'm technically challenged. Who's up?
Sorry, Kurt's on.
Kurt, you're up.
What do we got here?
All right.
Okay. I want to put this. Can't see the camera. Okay.
Yeah, you got me from there. You got that little box that I did too.
Great. Okay. This picture is supposed to illustrate the fact that milfoil can really get out of control. And our lake's nowhere near this sort of problem, although the South Coast did start to look a little like this in 2010. This is probably what Seneca Lake, the one you talked about, it looked like, the one they were mowing. It looked probably looked Saratoga. I'll get it right. Oh yes, it's Saratoga Lake. It probably looked like this at some point. I didn't see it.
It looked like that.
And then you mow it, and it will look a little fine for a few days, because it twitches. So, what's our future look like? As I said, we're not going to look like that, I don't think. And one of the reasons is because the milfoil grows only up to 13 feet, which is the littoral area, the area around the edge of the lake, which you saw in the earlier map. So it could grow in there. There are some critical areas there. The South Cove and the area between Ivy Island and the beach are all shallow enough for dense milfoil mats. And there are other areas up by the inlet and a few other minor, smaller areas. So here's what we need to talk about as we move forward, just to outline the issues, what's going on, the priorities of what do we want to get done with the lake? What are our priorities for the lake? We want to make it a fisherman's lake or a boating lake? What are the options if milfoil is a problem? What's the process of making a decision, and what kind of science do we need to have? So the priorities has to take into account the fact that there are a lot of users of the lake, and there's a lot of different purposes the lake's used for. I've left one off here, but I'll get to that. Obviously, there's just the people who stop by and want to look at the lake and say, oh, I'm in the Adirondacks, and they want to look nice, so you don't want the milfoil out there by Ivy Island for that. You have swimmers, it's clear what they want a clear lake. Canoeists and kayakers, powerboaters don't want their motors or propellers fouled. And fishermen want a good habitat for the fish. And the one I left off, of course, is you might call environmentalists, people who just want the lake to look as pristine as possible, pure. I think we're sort of beyond that to having utility for various uses, but it's still a legitimate concern. And we need to understand that all of these different concerns, whatever our particular opinion might be, and what our preferences might be, these are all legitimate concerns, and we have to hear these voices and work to a compromise. So what are our options? I tried to lay this out as just four relatively simple options, because they're all more complicated than that. But starting with the simplest and cheapest is just to let nature take its course. Just leave it alone, it'll grow. Some parts will look like that picture I showed you at the beginning. Others will be fine, other areas will be, boats will clear it, or owners will clear it, or swimmers will clear it. Another is to control as needed. In other words, set up criteria and say, once we reach this point, we're going to do something, whether it's certain areas or the whole lake or what. Once it gets to the point where we get enough complaints or we reach some scientific level that says we should do something, then we apply some action so it's clear. The third option, I made up a word here, proaction, is to actually have planned, continuous control efforts. That's where we are now, where every year we have the harvesters come in, take out as much as they can to bring the lake down to a good level. And the next year, this is all predicated on estimates of how much we need to take out to keep the lake comfortable. Another option, of course, is the mats that we talked about. We also talked about, Mike talked about the limitations of matting. But those would be both ways to have every year do something to the lake, or every other year. And the final is eradication, which is not really eradication, it's near eradication using some chemical method. Those are sort of the things we can at least talk about doing. All right. The process is one of politics. It's going to have all those voices you just heard in, or just saw. And these folks will be concerned about what does it cost? If you're a taxpayer, you want to know, right? Some folks don't want to pay the taxes at all as an interest in the lake, and others don't want to do anything because they're worried about the environment. But there's a lot of people who are worried about what can we use the lake for? Can we boat it? Can we swim in it? Can we fish in it? So we want to take into account all these concerns as we go forward. Important part of that is the science that backs it up. There's lots of pieces here. Just the users' reports I just talked about, when the users of one of the motels complain to the owner that they can't go swimming. There's routine visual inspections, which we've been doing with our CSLAB. There's chemistry, that's CSLAB again, the Citizens Statewide Lake Assessment Program. There's hundreds of lakes involved in that. You can find that on the web. In fact, there's reports from our lake and lots of other lakes. We'll talk about that more in a moment. And the town has paid now a number of times for, I just caught a few of them, for an actual species census, where the Darren Institute for Bolt Landing, they're associated with what? Syracuse University or someplace? Yeah. Goes out, they take a rope with a rake on the end of it, they throw it in the lake, they drag it along for some amount, pull up whatever they get, and count the species. And these are the sample points all around the lake. This is the 2010 map, but each year is about the same. You can see that report, the latest one, on the town website. If you just go to the main page and scroll down, you'll find it. It's a ways down, but you can find it there. You probably don't want to read it because, I mean, it's all the scientific names of all the species they found there. It's a page and a half of different species, and we're really only interested in a couple. The Eurasian milfoil, which is exotic in the sense of doesn't belong to the Adirondacks. It's also invasive in the sense that it's aggressive, crowds out the native plants, and has negative impact on the environment when it does so. So those are the two we're mostly interested in. There's not really much else that's even invasive. Most of the other census deals with native plants. So So, what it all boils down to finally, right now anyway, is what can we do as we move forward as individuals? We're not going to, obviously we've got a town budget to worry about and things like that and talk and getting permits, but there are also just basic things you can do on your own. If you take a boat out of the water, you're going to put it in another lake at some time, clean it up. Don't have all your stuff hanging off of it like this, because it takes only a seed from milfoil or a stolen, there it goes again. The tiniest little piece, you see, you clean it down, you wash it off, you dry it. Septic systems, especially Lake Luzerene's communities, I don't know, they're getting old. And we need to keep an eye on those. Obviously, they get more expensive as time goes on, but anyway. There are a lot of state and local initiatives. Obviously, there's a lot going on here. The state has actively passed a law, well, they're actively researching the control of salt on our highways as it affects lakes. So you're going to see some changes in the way they treat the highways in the winter. And brining is probably going to be the main one, but there may be some changes in chemicals and where they do it. I don't know about you folks, but when I was young, you learned as a driver to watch out for the icy spots. You didn't think you were going to sue the state because they left a piece of ice on the highway. But apparently times have changed, and everybody expects to have a perfectly clear highway to drive at whatever speed they want to. So the state seems to feel like they have to respond to that. Stay up on things and be aware that there are budget processes going on. This fall there'll be the 2023 budget of the town, and I don't know if it's a done deal or not, but they're ready to talk about the milfoil funding. All right, just a moment.
So what has been the level of milfoil funding in the current year or in recent years? What does it take to do what you've been doing?
In terms of costs, or?
Yeah, cost.
I'm going to have to be careful with that because I don't really want to speak to the town's budget on much. My understanding was that there's $80,000 allotted in this budget, this year's budget for it.
From last year.
And that's a combination of what was not spent last year because the contractor backed out due to COVID. And they spent, I think, close to half of it so far on the first part of the season, which is the heaviest picking. But it's not clear that, to me anyway, that this is going to be linear because the density of the milfoil goes down, which makes it a little bit easier to pick. But then again, you don't get the volumes, and you have to go farther to get a load. So there's more time in the whole operation. So there's going to be some trade-offs there. But it's very, very hard to figure out how to. I mean, we've had this question, we had the question at the meeting last Friday, what is the cost per ton to remove milfoil? Well, there's no simple answer to that question because of all the variables involved.
But just so I understand, that 80,000 over the last 2 years, that is paying for the harvesting that you were not at that time doing the herbicides, is that right?
Correct. The herbicides are not since 2010. That was a one-time application. It succeeded in making the cove pretty much empty of milfoil. It was very clear for about the most part of 10 years. I mean, I didn't write notes down, but I remember at least 5 or 6 years we didn't see any milfoil, and it took a while after that for it to become noticeable. It's, it goes towards the surface, it switches a day. Once it starts to emerge, it emerges fairly quickly and folds over, and you can see it. Any other questions on? Yes.
Do you have a boat cleaning station for the lake?
They do have a hose at the dock, at the boat ramp.
And some,
Sorry.
And we don't have Lake Stewart. Lake Stewart would be responsible for checking a boat that comes in to launch. It's voluntary. We have hoses that poke the state launch, which is at the other beach on the other side of the school, and also by the Pierpont Road beach, called Main Beach. And it's just a hose. Here, people are supposed to wash their boats. Some do, some don't. It's not enforced. Lake George, you can't put your boat in the water until it's checked. And they have people there called lake stewards, and they get paid.
The lake stewards have been placed, it's the Adirondack Water Institute out of Paulson's College. Has this program. I guess they hire students. I'm not, the finances I don't understand, I don't know. But they have got lake stewards placed along the Northway, and when people stop, they say, hey, I see you got a boat, you mind if we check it? Give you a little certificate. Yeah, Jim.
They do have a steward part-time down Hudson River.
What's that word?
Yeah.
I heard they didn't have anybody staffing it this year, which is something maybe we should.
It's been staffed part-time.
We need to encourage our local residents to need a job.
Well, that's one of the things you can do as part of your being an activist, is if you see somebody with a boat, you can say so, be a steward yourself. To me, one of the complications of that is you're washing your boat when you take it out. There's no real incentive to wash it to take it out. And if you bring it over here and then wash it at the ramp when you're putting it in, that doesn't help because you're washing what you're trying to get rid of into the lake. So it seems like a bit of a problem, but checking on the highway seems like a good idea. Okay, we've been participating, well, it's been a number of years now. The latest phase has been the last 3 years when a number of us have gone out every other week, 8 times a season, and collected samples. And there's a whole lot of data we get by way of water samples. We use this funny looking bottle here. It's got a name, there's some scientist named Kemner. And it shows, I think we've got this thing all up here.
That's because I picked it up.
It goes in the water like this, and you drop this weight down the rope, and it triggers this thing and causes it to close, collecting a sample of water at whatever depth you are. So we collect a shallow at 1.5 meters and a deep 1.5 meters below the bottom. So it's 1.5 meters from the top, 1.5 meters from the bottom. And those samples are then, we do some pre-processing, bottle it all up and send it off to a lab, which does the real lab work. And then we also do the water clarity, which is an interesting process too. The disc has a black and a white on it, so you get a contrast, so you can have an idea when you can see it, when you can't. And you drop that in the water and drop it down so you can't see it anymore. And we're getting around 5.2 meters, that's a little 15 feet of water clarity. Now those numbers, the lab tells us things like, did you put that on this one? Phosphorus, nitrogen, which are nutrients for the algae, and the total chlorophyll count in the lake. And all of this is telling us things about how much biological activity there is in the lake. This is not directly milfoil. This is the lake health as a whole. And watching the trends in this.
Go to the next one. That's the next one.
Oh, you got the next one? Oh, yeah. Watching the trends in this tells us, to watch out for something. I mean, for example, one piece of the good news of our lake is the calcium levels are so low that we can't grow zebra mussels. So we're not going to have the problem that Lake George has with the zebra mussels. That's phosphorus, nitrogen. I mentioned nitrogen, it's not on the chart. HAB is harmful algal bacteria.
Blooms.
Blooms? Oh, okay, bacteria blooms. All right, blooms. A bloom, of course, is when it takes off on a mat like this. And they can be quite dangerous. There's a way to report those. I'm sorry I don't have the website. There's a way to report those to the DEC. If you see something, if you see a bad one, don't stick your hand in there, okay? Or put gloves on, because it can be dangerous. We have not seen any in Lake Luzerne, so we're good there. All right.
Well, I'm going to give the homework.
The homework.
Since I did the quiz, right, here's your homework. So if you're interested, right, how do you learn about this, more about it and stay informed? And as we've been working on this, we have been reading more. The Diet for a Small Lake is a great resource. It's put out by DEC, and you can download it for free as a PDF.
It talks extensively about, some of it's very interesting, the old geology of how the lakes came to be. And it also talks about some of the stuff I mentioned about all the different users and how you need to take their interest into account.
Another good resource is The Secret Life of a Lake. And it's written by a retired biology professor from Union College. And that's another really accessible explanation about what goes on in the lake. And this is the copy from the library here. It's available at the library here. We did a paper. We had the benefit of having a graduate student with us during the pandemic. They needed some research hours because they couldn't get their normal shadowing activities. So we had a biology student work with us for the first summer of the pandemic. And so we wrote a paper for the Adirondack Journal of Environmental Studies that describes in more detail the history of that. And the link is on the slides, but if you just Google Adirondack Journal of Environmental Studies, you can download it from there. We also participate in New York State Federation of Lake Associations. They have a conference in April, which is good. We always learn by talking to the other lake association folks that are there and from the experts that come and give presentations. The Adirondack Lakes Alliance, which was last week, was also a good. And then each region in New York State has a PRISM, which is a partnership for regional invasive species management. And they do a lot of education. They have websites. They give various talks. I went to a talk given by I think it was the Capital Region one in Ballston Spa some years ago. So they have a lot of educational material and resources available. And that's all we have tonight. So we'll turn the lights up and be happy to take any questions or discussion that you have.
Mike, what year was the chemical treatment you did approximately?
2010.
2010.
And it was funded primarily by the town at the time. He was.
And you saw definite results as long
Oh,
as
later
5, 6 years
on.
later?
We saw him as long as 6, 7 years. And we saw results within a month.
I'm on the application.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think about it.
So I know that's a small percentage of the lake, but that would have affected the cost to harvest. Because for a while, you probably didn't have to do the cell coat at all.
We had 2 volunteer divers initially. They were volunteers. They were, one was Phil Campbell Sun, in fact, and the other one was Phil Hyde, who was works with the federal government as an ecologist. And they were both scuba divers, and they did some harvesting and showed some of the people who lived on the lake how to go down snorkeling with, within 4, 5, 6 feet, or people used rakes or whatever they did to try to see if they could remove it. We found that was not going to work for the lake. So that's what we hired a professional diver, Steve Lemire, who was just by himself. He did as much as he could for the money that was allotted. We had fundraisers. We went around the lake to ask for donations, which we got. The town kicked in money, but it was obvious we weren't going to get ahead of it. We were mowing the lawn with a push mower. We needed a rider, kind of, give you an idea of what we were facing. The milfoil was proliferating, like you could see it from year to year expand in the lake. And it was truly an invasive that other lakes who were ahead of us had jumped on before us. And as we did some research and talked with people from other lakes, we found we needed
we needed to do more. We needed money, and we needed to get some professional help.
I believe you said this current season you taken out 20 tons of.
Between 15 and 20 tons they weigh.
Now, has that been at roughly the same level for the last several years, or has that risen, or is that declined?
That's one.
It's gone down.
Yeah.
And when you take that milfoil out, does other vegetation come in behind it?
Yes.
And is that more healthier vegetation? What are you getting?
Native plants come back. The milfoil will choke out native plants.
So where did it come from originally from boats?
What, milfoil?
Yeah, it comes
I
from
did
down.
research that.
Well, and one of the slides said duration, so
Yes.
this is an inland small lake. So how did it get
Of
here?
course, the big lakes too.
I'm assuming that it came across the ocean at the bottom of ocean liners,
Yeah.
and then somehow, I don't know the progress that it made from the ocean going down
I said earlier,
to a boat that is used on lake.
Well, for example, if you go up to the St. Lawrence Seaway, go along there, and then come down here, that's an entrance to the ocean.
There you go.
A lot of the cases came in ballasts of ships.
and a lot of things that have been for ornamental reasons or
That also-
ornamental reasons or agricultural reasons.
Excuse me.
A number of species came here because they're imported to be ornamental.
So is this one of those
Milfoil is an aquatic
Because
for aquariums?
for aquariums. Water is no longer sold.
Okay.
I mean, it's no longer sold, but go back 50 years, 60 years,
So
that's what,
so this is where it comes from, what keeps it in balance? I just want to know that.
what keeps it.
In balance where it grows naturally.
here we have another version of milfoil,
Yeah.
besides the Eurasian milfoil. And it's exotic, it's non-invasive.
Yeah.
So it's in balance with whatever. I mean, I don't know whether it's the snails of the eater or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know what, in its native environment, what keeps it out from check.
Some of those are actually protected.
Yes, many of them are.
In fact, we've got Solitude coming in next week,
Next week.
or next week, the week after, to do another survey to analyze the good weeds.
To jump on for a second, Solitude is a company that we are working with, and at the last conference that you and I went to, you missed that one, nice photo. We met with the head of the company there, and scientific evaluations that they've been doing for years, the treatment that they do for milfoil is specific to milfoil, which was interesting. It was like, medically treating a disease where you are just targeting that one issue. And they've been doing studies for a decade or more. And some of the lakes in the Midwest, who are really ahead of us in this, have put together packages of quote-unquote milfoil or invasive species control that, they're just ahead of us, so we're kind of catching up. But it's good that we can find out and coordinate. You may read or know that Lake George is trying to do something, and there's a small group of people there that are fighting them so that there now is an injunction for the company to use herbicide in such a small area of the lake. And Lake George is, I don't know how many times bigger than Luzerne, it's huge.
The other thing I would be interested in knowing is if there's any beneficial use you could make of the milfoil once you years.
Yeah, I tried that years ago. I thought it was spread the rumor that if you dry it and roll it into a cigarette.
I did, when there was a sargasso seaweed invasion of the Caribbean and choked the beaches. The grass would be periodically off the beaches and dry and then used you know, and soil enrichment, stuff like that. So, because you're piling it up down the town dump area,
Now, we find that to be an enclosed
but because what's happening there?
That's before Jim was on the board, but I was at a board meeting years ago where I said that we need to advertise for the aphrodisiac. And we talked about, there's several ways to try to control it as well. If we learned at our conferences, you could put carp in a lake, and carp will eat milfoil, but then you've got a carp problem. You can buy these, we needed millions of them, the weevils. Weevils.
Sounds like it's all weed.
It's a milfoil weevil. But you need so many of them. You need, what, a penny a piano.
Wow.
2 cents, whatever they are. Anyway, that was less prohibitive, and you use them 1 year, and then it gets cold here, I was told, in the winter, and they freeze and die. So you need a whole new batch. So that didn't go. And then at one meeting I brought up, she's laughing. You want to bring manatee up. Manatees love milfoil.
You know, that's the creative idea.
And they told me to leave that meeting at the town hall. She loves it. I thought the parts of behind us from here. Anyway, what we've done is the hand harvesting. We've done the bringing the boats in. We've done the matting. We've done what we needed to do in the past, and hopefully we can possibly again go for with a permit, probably not next year, but the following year, and treat more of the lake than we have in the past. Because it's so expensive to do the harvesting, using the harvesting and the divers and so on. How many lakes are using herbicides? That's a question for Tracy or Nancy. No.
Are there any in the work at all?
No.
Are you using herbicides? No.
Yes.
Well, oh, yes.
Salt, that's 2 or 3 things.
In the park?
In the park. Yeah, they got their permits.
Minerva, they did last year or the year before.
Last year. It was last year.
I think it's APA is.
They signed off. They signed off on Lake George.
The APA signed up on Lake George.
The Minerva results are very encouraging.
To go back to your question about how did these invasives get introduced, there's a good book, The Death and Life of the Great Lakes, and it talks, it's the history of how, the St. Lawrence Seaway, what that did to the Great Lakes. So that's a good source if you're interested in learning more about that. And we also, if you'd like a copy of the slides, we'll be happy to send them to you. And you can write on the Waterworks, which is the newsletter that's put out by the New York State Federation of Lake Association. So if you want to, we have a couple of them, someone like it.
That's free. There's a lot of free information out there for both the state and the federal government. We're just hoping that financially, the town has been supporting us 100%. We continue that, we need to keep that up. And I know that other lakes are interested. I got a call yesterday from one of the local lakes to get together. They are concerned.
I'm representing Fourth Lake.
This was Bernard.
Okay, well.
But you're all in that chain. You're all in that chain.
Fortunately, we're upriver.
You know, it doesn't seem to matter though, where you are.
Don't say that.
Well, it's true, because if someone's paddling up through that area, they can see your lake.
But there's no motorboats in any of the other lakes.
No,
So that makes a big difference.
it does, yeah. Okay, any other questions?
I was just curious about the curious about the hand harvesting, because it can be spread through the seeds or whatever. What, how do you stop that with the hand harvesting? Or don't?
What we did when initially we had people out in canoes, rowboats, kayaks, and they had nets, and they were picking up fragments, but you can't get every fragment. We try to get 90% of what was floated. That was our first years in doing it. Now there's the suction harvesting, where they go down and pick it from the root, so it doesn't hit the surface.
The water is pumped out of the boat with the weeds in it, and then it goes through a screen, which the openings of the screen are a certain size, so only water goes back.
You'll find around the library there are brochures that we got from Nature Conservancy that gives them the nice quality brochures with nice pictures of what to look out for. You can order these for at no charge from Nature Conservancy, and if you have them for your lake or make them available to people, it's a good resource.
They also have a poster size.
Poster size as well. And there's some over there, some, I think, at the front as well. So thank you all for coming tonight.
I think the place that I know, yes.